Welcome, everyone. We're only a few classes away from the end of this course, but hopefully we'll have plenty of material to cover. I can tell already from preparing for tonight. So, all right, let's go ahead and begin with our prayers as usual. Let me put those on the screen. And we'll just do the praise to Shakyamuni Buddha together once, and then we'll go on to the mandala offering and then the refuge and bodhicitta prayer. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. I go for refuge until I am enlightened, to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Songye chodong soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyapsu chi daki chanyen gi pe sanam gi dola penchir sangye dupar sho Songye chodong soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyapsu chi Daki chunyan gipe sanam gi dola penchir sangye druparsho. Okay, good. Let's do a little bit of meditation together. So as usual, we're going to spend just a few minutes focusing on the breath in order to kind of come into this space and let go of whatever distractions we might have from our day, things we were preoccupied with, what have you. And then we'll set our motivation together and do just a short reflection to move into tonight's teaching. So go ahead and start with working with the breath in whatever way you prefer, just keeping the awareness with the breath whenever the mind wanders, guiding the mind gently back to the breath. Okay, so I'll ring the chime here in the Gompa to begin the meditation. So to set our motivation for tonight, I thought it might be useful just to reflect on what we talked about last week in terms of the two types of meditation. It might sound strange to meditate on meditation, but it is important that we understand the necessity of both types of meditation, as Lama Tsongkhapa emphasized in his text. And we need the first one, the stabilizing meditation, because currently our minds are very distracted. We need to have that single-pointed focus that will be an important tool to actually change our minds, to be able to let go of all of those things that distract us or that make the mind unserviceable, and to be able to use our minds in the most productive way. But if we had that alone, it wouldn't do the full job, because we need to develop the insight into the various topics the Buddha taught, in particular, the nature of reality, emptiness. And therefore, we need the second type of meditation, analytical meditation, to actually investigate teachings through studying them, reading them, developing some insight through our contemplation and reflection upon those topics, and then eventually uniting that wisdom with this deeper meditative state, this single-pointed concentration, to be able to generate true insight, develop the wisdom that arises from meditation. So again, if we were to simply engage in study and developing wisdom on that side without having stabilized our minds, without having developed single-pointed concentration, we couldn't change our minds at the deepest level. It would be effective to some degree for us to know the truth through having investigated the Buddha's teachings. If we ever want to achieve any lasting results, we have to have the stable mind, the mind of calm abiding. So these two work hand in hand. We need to develop the stability of mind that is calm abiding, or a state even higher than that, as we discussed last week, one of the concentrations and so on. Then we have to unite that with the mind of special insight, developed through our investigation into the teachings, such as what we're doing in this course, so that we can gain realizations of these topics, can actually transform our minds from our unenlightened state into the complete state of Buddhahood, where we have developed our minds completely, removing all the negative tendencies, everything that pollutes and obscures our minds, and developing all the positive qualities, all of our compassion and love, wisdom, patience, and so on. So as we set our motivation, just reflect on that idea that as we go about another evening of investigating these teachings, we're doing this with this kind of twofold purpose: to continue to deepen our own meditative practice so that we can have very powerful minds, but then to use the teachings that we're learning, to integrate them into our awareness through those deeper meditative states. And we're here to do that so we can become a Buddha as quickly as possible, and then lead all sentient beings to attaining that same state. So hold that motivation of bodhicitta for tonight's teaching. So what we do here together becomes the cause for that result, our own enlightenment, and the enlightenment of each and every single sentient being. And then you can open your eyes fully when you're ready, and we'll begin. So thank you all for showing up for tonight's class. Again, I think we've got 2 more classes in April, and then I will be doing some introduction to what we're going to do in the break. If people want to take the test for this course, I'll give you some instruction on how that will be managed. Probably at the class 2 weeks from tonight, I'll go through all of that. So in the last class, we were going through the last part on the meditation session. And as I mentioned in the motivation tonight, Tsongkhapa added a little bit at the very end about after he talked about the practices that we engage in between sessions when we're out and about doing whatever we do. And then he gave kind of an emphasis to why we need these two practices, why we have to have some, again, engagement in a stabilizing practice, which allows the mind to settle, and then a meditative investigation through analytical meditation of the topics that we are all exploring. I think I mentioned this last week, but my teacher in Italy, he I think this was one of the first teachings we had from him. He talked about how if you meditate without study, it's like trying to climb a rock face with your fist closed, which is kind of a strange image. I can't imagine how anybody would even think to do that. But the idea is if you can develop great meditative skill. And that's a wonderful thing to have again. But that's not going to get you to the destination. If you really want to get to enlightenment, you have to unite that very powerful mind with study so that you know where to go, you know where to move the mind and attain the realizations that will help you proceed along the path. So that's the whole idea behind this, is really to, embrace both of these as part of our meditation practice as much as we can. And of course, to spend time in retreat where we can, and eventually perhaps have longer retreat where we can actually develop the mind of calm abiding, or even some of these deeper states of awareness, the concentrations and so on. But anyway, let's go ahead and move to the text. We were finishing off that section. We didn't quite finish it. You might recall that on the previous slide at the bottom there in blue, we went through that part. And that was actually one of the questions on homework 7, this notion that all thought involves apprehending signs, and therefore it creates obstacles to enlightenment. Well, that may be a point of view that somebody might hold, that conceptual mind is a problem. And eventually, of course, we do abandon our conceptual mind. When we get to deeper levels of realization, that has to be abandoned for us to develop, true insight into emptiness, the direct realization of emptiness, and so on. But this, idea has the fault of not differentiating between improper mental attention that apprehends true existence, inherent existence, which the wisdom of emptiness refutes, and proper mental attention, thinking of reality. We do have a level of engagement in understanding things conventionally and so on, and even understanding emptiness in a conceptual framework to get to that direct realization. We absolutely need to have some conceptual framework in order to get there. And I'm not in any way trying to, refute what other Buddhist traditions say. I can't speak to what they say in practice, but there definitely is this idea in some traditions about achieving a more spontaneous realization of emptiness that isn't contingent upon having studied prior to that. And again, that may be so, but in our tradition, we say that there's great value to studying emptiness, meditating on it in a more conceptual framework, fine-tuning our investigation of that topic until we cross over that bridge into a direct insight. So this is the idea behind that. But we're just a few more topics in this chapter on the meditation session that involve kind of these two types of meditation that we'll take a look at, and then we can go on to the main topic for tonight, which is looking at this idea of the perfect human rebirth, this amazing value of this life that we have currently and how we can use it well. So let's go on to the next section here. In pink, we have a whole nother kind of idea that somebody might be putting forward. The idea that you must achieve a non-conceptual concentration that allows you to place the mind on a single object as you wish, and that if you do a lot of analytical meditation beforehand, it will prevent the arising of concentration, is also contrary to the present instructions. So the idea here is that, yes, we do want to achieve a non-conceptual concentration, but using our conceptual mind in analytical meditation doesn't become an obstacle to the arising of that. These things, again, can be done in tandem. They use this example that is kind of an interesting one. It says, for example, a skillful goldsmith burns gold or silver in the fire and washes it in water again and again, removing all the impurities and making it very pliant, so that it can be made into whatever jewelry one wishes. such as earrings. The idea is that this is kind of what our minds are right now. We need to kind of make our minds a little more serviceable. And that can be done initially through some level of analytical meditation, where we come to realize what the nature of things are to some extent conventionally, the situation that we're in, karma, teachings on that, and so on, so that we then know that we need to engage in these forms of meditation to help purify our own minds. So it says here, likewise, at first you meditate on the afflictions, the secondary afflictions, non-virtuous actions and their effects in the case of bad conduct, and the faults of psychic existence in the order in which they are presented. Those are essentially the teachings on the Four Noble Truths, which we're going to see again in part 2 when we look at the middle path for the middle capable being. But the idea is that we have to have some context for what we're going to be actually meditating on. In fact, this is what I'm going to be talking about in this Sunday's class, by the way. I'm just not trying to promote the class. It's just coming into mind for me. When we look at the Eightfold Path that is set out, and it's a primary tool that's used in the Theravadan tradition for examining the Buddha's teachings, it always starts with initially some level of wisdom we have to have. We have to know the framework in which we are operating. What is it that we're trying to actually accomplish? On the basis of that, we go on to, begin getting greater control over our behavior through the practice of morality. And then we, of course, engage in deeper concentration. So we develop some stability of mind, and then we can unite that with wisdom. It all forms a perfect circle. Everything feeds into each other. So we have to have some level of understanding to begin with. Otherwise, why do we meditate? Why do we, change our behavior? Why do we do anything? Some level of knowledge is where it all starts. So the idea here, too, is that, as Tsongkhapa is saying, at first we have to understand the context in which the Buddha gives his teachings, which is essentially the Four Noble Truths. So he says then, by meditating with analytical wisdom on such faults again and again, the faults of samsara and so on, you become completely downhearted or mentally dejected, like burning gold in fire, whereby you turn away from the non-virtuous side and clear away those defilements. So the idea is that we need some impetus for us to actually move in that direction. And if we see that what we've been involved in is unsatisfactory and faulty, well, then we turn away from it. It says here you become, completely downhearted. It's not that you become sort of depressed or anything. You just come to see things as they are. You develop that mind that we're going to see in that second part of this course, the mind of renunciation, where we turn away from the patterns we've been engaged in and want to emerge into a state of freedom from all of that. Then it says, next, you meditate on the excellent qualities of the spiritual friend, the preciousness of the freedoms and endowments, the excellent qualities of the three jewels, virtuous actions and their effects, the benefits of bodhicitta, and so on, in the order in which they are presented. That's what we're doing in this course. Again, we are going to touch on the freedoms and endowments of this life tonight. We looked at the qualities of our spiritual friends and our reliance upon them previously. We're going to go on to look at refuge and all these other topics in the next section. And then part 3 is where we'll introduce bodhicitta. It's all set out very sequentially, but we have to have some initial impetus to do that. So then he goes on and emphasizes this point: by meditating with the wisdom of fine investigation on such excellent qualities again and again, your mind becomes drenched with them, and you develop clarifying faith, which is usually said to be kind of the first level of faith, which is said to be like washing gold with water, where you kind of remove the initial sort of defilements, the grosser defilements, by seeing things very clearly. You come to understand the path that the Buddha taught, whereby you turn toward the virtuous side and take delight in it. Thus the mind is saturated with virtuous qualities. When it has been transformed in that way, whether you wish to achieve shamatha, calm abiding, or again, vipassana, special insight, you will achieve it without difficulty when your mind is focused on it. That is why such an analytical meditation is the best means of achieving a non-conceptual concentration. So rather than someone saying, well, this analytical meditation using my conceptual thought to investigate things is an obstacle to my achieving a non-conceptual meditative state, that's total, contrary to how Tsongkhapa sees it. We actually use our conceptual investigation of things, come to understand the context of the Buddha's teachings, come to understand what we need to do to renounce our, previous patterns and to move in the direction of attaining liberation, enlightenment, what have you. And then we engage in the teachings accordingly. And our mind becomes much more attuned to developing those two types of practices, both the non-conceptual awareness we eventually generate through deeper single-pointed meditative concentration, as well as the mind of analytical investigation that becomes very powerful at cutting through all of our faults, all of our mistaken ideas, all of our ignorance, and so on. So then he quotes Arya Sangha, and I've got a little box there, essentially just saying that according to the Lamrim Chenmo, this is from a Sangha's hearer levels, the Shravaka Bhumi. And just in case you wondered, I don't know, he usually attributes the actual texts that these quotes are from. But Arya Sangha said it in this way. For example, when a smith or their skillful apprentice burns gold or silver in a fire, and washes it with water a couple of times in order to remove all impurities and stains, it becomes pliant and malleable for fashioning this or that ornament. Their method is clearly evident, so those with the appropriate mastery of a smith or skillful apprentice can then fashion whatever ornament they wish using a smith's tools. So there's kind of the initial process of making it somewhat serviceable so that you have this pure gold that you can then, do whatever you wish with it, make whatever forms, but that's the second step. Then you have the mastery of that person that fashions it into the ornaments that they desire. Likewise, a yogi ensures that their mind is not turned toward impurities and stains, such as covetousness, and cultivates disenchantment, again, which is another term for renunciation, delighting their mind by focusing not on the stresses of the afflicted mind, but on the virtuous side instead. That yogi doubtlessly trains their mind in either the side of shamatha or the side of special insight, such that either it is closely applied to this and that, or it is resting in its natural state. Again, it's either, through more thought processes, applying it to this and that, trying to analyze accordingly, or resting in its natural state where it's no longer dealing with any discordant factors. Unmoving and unwavering, as he says. It can also be directed for the sake of perfectly achieving whatever purpose that yogi has contemplated. So that's the idea behind this, again, is that we need both of these types of meditation, and they definitely complement each other. They're not obstacles to each other in any way. Furthermore, he goes on to reiterate, which is something we're not going to see till the fourth part of this when we look at how we develop shamatha, calm abiding. The main hindrance to the mind abiding on an object continuously is twofold. The hindrance of laxity and the hindrance of excitement. These two are the kind of the drawing down in of the mind, the laxity that makes the mind very dull, and the excitement towards kind of an attraction towards desirable objects that draws the mind outward. If you have a strong and constant awareness that sees the excellent qualities of the three jewels and so forth, it's quite easy to overcome laxity. For many valid sources say that its antidote is to uplift the mind by looking at excellent qualities. So he's pointing out here that we also find that even in overcoming the obstacles to developing the stability of mind, calm abiding, we use analytical meditation often. The analytical meditation that reflects on the excellent qualities of the three jewels, or even the topic that we are going to discuss next, which is this perfect human rebirth. That can be very inspiring for us. We think, oh, we have this amazing opportunity right now. We have to use this well. Therefore, I can't let my mind become dull and lax. I need to sharpen my attention and raise the mind up. And then we see it on the opposite side too. If we have excitement, we can use an analytical meditation to draw the mind in so that it's not quite so distracted outward to objects of attraction. If you have a strong and constant awareness that sees the faults of impermanence, suffering, and so forth, it's quite easy to overcome excitement. For excitement is a distracted mind belonging to the category of attachment, and many texts praise disenchantment as its antidote. If we come to see again that all of these things that we would be normally attracted to, that the mind is getting attracted to in the midst of our meditation, that those are impermanent and they're in the nature of suffering, well then why follow those objects? Bring the mind back in and focus on the object at hand. So we use analytical meditation even in conjunction with developing calm abiding at times. So these two cannot be absolute contradictory states, because then you wouldn't be able to use them in tandem in that way. So we have lots of kind of evidence from Lama Tsongkhapa there that these are both practices we need to embrace. And they're also, again, an important part of our spiritual progress. The necessity of having something very focused in terms of our concentration so that we can stay with an object and really let it penetrate deeply into our minds, but then having the sharpness of our minds to be able to investigate those topics so we can come to the proper conclusions and then use these two together. I talked about that last week, right? About how we use these two in tandem. Meditating initially to calm the mind somewhat. And then when we investigate and arrive at the conclusion of that meditation, we go back to stabilizing on that conclusion. This is the way we can really, come to change our own minds. So any final questions on that chapter or the whole topic of meditation, the meditation session? Maybe before I move on, I'll see if there's anything there, because we're going to move into a whole new topic with this next chapter. No? Okay. All right. So let's go ahead. The next topic is really a very important one. When we look at what we've already covered, there's like two main meditation topics in this first part. Not that we can't meditate on some of the other topics that are there. I mean, you can certainly meditate on the greatness of the author or the greatness of the Dharma. These things we covered quite a few weeks ago. But nonetheless, in terms of the actual meditations on the Lamrim, it is really useful to look at the topics that are these preliminary topics that are covered in this first part. The first one was, of course, relying upon our spiritual guides, our mentors, the gurus, and how we have to have that proper relationship with our teachers to benefit most from what we often refer to as that external condition. We need the external condition of these guides on our path to help us to move in the direction of attaining realizations. We need them to give us instruction, to help us to know how to practice the Dharma, how to meditate on it, how to achieve realizations of it, and so on. Having guides to help us on that path is really an important sort of, again, external factor. Now we're moving into sort of the internal factor that we've created through the force of our own actions in the past, which is this perfect human rebirth, which we, now have another day of using this life and hopefully using it as best as we can. The purpose of this reflection and all the topics we're going to look at within this is to really give us that impetus to use this life well, to not let this opportunity go by and not be used to move us in the direction of attaining realization. So these two come together at the beginning because they really give us the framework for our current situation. We have created from our side this perfect opportunity where we have the ability with this human life to investigate the teachings very deeply. And we've met with these amazing guides who are there to help us to learn all of this. So if we put those two together, we've got, again, everything we need to use this life in incredible ways, in very meaningful ways. So this is the purpose behind this second meditation topic, again, that are the main meditation topics in the Lamrim from this part of the Lamrim. Everything we engage in from here on out is going to be a topic for meditation. So we're no longer in that introductory stuff that we were going through, getting our heads around the teachings, around a meditation session, what all happens, what have you. Now we're going to be looking at the main topics all the way through the second, third, and fourth parts. They're all so that we can investigate and come to realize all the remaining topics of the Lamrim. So these first two, the spiritual teacher and then the perfect human rebirth, are really important as foundational preliminary topics for us to use in our, again, practice and study. So this chapter is called The Freedoms and Endowments of This Life. You will see different ways that these are referred to. I know Lama Zopa Rinpoche sometimes called the second one the richnesses, but he often did refer to the first one as freedom. Sometimes people use this word leisures, which is kind of a strange word, but nonetheless, freedoms and endowments are the terms we're going to be using for these two aspects of this life that is the first topic that we're going to investigate. So we have the first overall headline, and what's kind of interesting, again, is we're going to see this is the having done the previous one on the spiritual teacher and then the meditation session where we investigate that topic, we now look at the stages of training the mind once we've relied on a teacher. So this is kind of the immediate topic after having said, well, we need a teacher. We found a teacher, hopefully to some degree, that we can follow on our path. And then we need to know what to do after we have relied upon a teacher. And it's basically two topics. The first one is an exhortation to take the essence of this life that is endowed with freedom. And then secondly, the way to take its essence. Well, the second point there, the way to take its essence, is the remainder of this course, all the way through the fourth part. How do we take the essence of this life? By engaging in the rest of the teachings. But we have to first get this exhortation to really use this life well. That what we have right now is an incredibly precious and perfect opportunity. So let's go through that exhortation. That's the remainder of this chapter. This has 3 points: identifying the freedoms and endowments, contemplating their great value, and contemplating the difficulty in finding them. We're going to see those come around and be kind of the main focus of our meditation. It's not set out quite as clearly in the middle length Lamrim as it is in some of the Lamrim texts. I'll have some places where I'll add some additional comments from Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand, I think is the main one. But these are the 3 main topics. We first have to know, what do we mean by the freedoms and endowments? What is it that we currently possess that we then can see the value of? The second one is to contemplate that value, that if we have this current situation, what is it that we can achieve from this? In other words, this phrase, how can we extract the essence of this life? What is it that we can actually accomplish with this life that has those freedoms and endowments? And then thirdly, we have to have some understanding of the difficulty in finding this. Because if we don't, then we take it for granted and think, oh, it'll be very easy to get again. And we don't have to worry about using this life so well because there's another human life right down the pike for us. Well, maybe, may not be. We'll take a look at the teachings there. Okay, so the first one, identifying what we mean by this life that is rich in freedoms and endowments. We have a verse summary from the Perfection of Wisdom, the Prajnaparamita Sanchayagata. I don't know that text so well, but it's, again, a verse summary from the Prajnaparamita Sutra. It says, through ethical discipline, the characteristics of the numerous animal births and the 8 unfree states are abandoned. Thus you win constant freedom. So this verse is going to be explained to some degree, but essentially we're talking about, when we use the word freedoms, we're talking about being free from states that would not allow us to use that life well. So we're going to look at it in terms of 2 categories. 4 of them are human existences where we wouldn't have ideal human situations, because just being born human isn't a guarantee that you can use this life well. You need to have other things in place as a human being so that you can make good use of a human existence. The other 4 have to do with being free from states of existence that are not really ideal, and in fact would not be ideal at all. There are certainly some states of existence that are not maybe as ideal as a human one, but these 4 are definitely problematic. They're not going to be states of existence where we can use our life in a meaningful way, generally. I mean, this is kind of the rule, but so let's go ahead and take a look at these and how they're set out, because we're essentially talking about what are the things that we are free from that make this life quite special and unique, and again, the perfect opportunity. So it says there, so the freedoms consist in freedom from the 8 unfree states. It's kind of a weird word. It's got freedom in there twice and unfree once. These are, again, states that don't have the leisure or the opportunity that we currently possess because we are born with this perfect human rebirth. Among the 8 unfree states, the first 4, these are, again, unfree states of humans, meaning that these are states that are experienced by many humans that we are not experiencing in this life right now. First, living in a remote and savage land where the 4 types of followers of the Buddha do not go. There are certainly places in this world, in this human life, where, the Buddha Dharma has not reached, or if it's reached there, it has been excised from there. There might be theocratic governments where they've not allowed Buddhism to be there. Essentially, when we say free of the four types of followers, we're talking about the two male and female ordained practitioners, and then the two male and female lay practitioners. And so essentially, those are what are often said to be kind of the four followers that are kind of there as an indication that the Buddha's teachings are still present, are still, being practiced and so on. So we can, I guess all of us, whatever country you're in now, you've obviously found the Buddha Dharma through the good fortune of everything that's happened that has allowed the Buddha Dharma to be in your place where you reside. Certainly, it was mainly in Asia for a good part of the 20th century, and then began to move, into other parts of the world. But prior to the 20th century, really was not that well disseminated beyond Asia. So we can certainly look at us living at a time when we have this opportunity to be in a country, have been born in a country or raised in a country, living in a country where we do have access to the Buddha Dharma. So in this way, we're free from that unfree state of having lived in a remote or savage land where the four types of followers of the Buddha are not present, they do not go. The second one, being stupid or dumb and having incomplete faculties or missing body parts, such as ears and so forth. Again, the idea here is that we do recognize there's some value to having, didn't mean to go there, having kind of complete faculties, the ability to use our minds and our bodies well. Certainly, people get by. This is not meant to be critical of people who are in some way disadvantaged or other abled, as it's often called, who maybe don't have the use of their ears or their eyes or what have you. But when we have complete faculties, we obviously have many more avenues through which we can use this life well. We're not saying, again, that you absolutely have to have everything complete in order to use this life well. But if that is your situation of having all of them complete, we can see the value of that. So we're free from a state where we don't have any great mental or physical impairment that would disallow us to engage in the Dharma more completely. The third one is holding wrong views that misconstrue past and future lives, actions and their effects, and the three jewels to be non-existent. So if we're holding wrong views saying that the things that the Buddha taught to exist, such as, past and future lives, karma, the three jewels, the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, to be non-existent, then we would have an obstacle to practicing the Dharma. This is kind of an interesting one because we're not really born necessarily with those wrong views. We've developed them over time. And of course, the correct views we develop over time, to actually have some faith in the three jewels and in karma and what have you. But this is one for each of us to investigate, because to what extent have we overcome some of our wrong views? For some of us, we may still be kind of not so sure about the topic of karma or even rebirth, and not being absolutely sure that those things are in fact something we can rely upon and have that kind of confidence in at this stage of our spiritual path. And if we do have that, that's great. But what's important is that we don't have a wrong view that is kind of negating those things. That's saying, even though the Buddha says karma exists, rebirth exists, the three jewels exist, and so on, we want to try to avoid the mind that thinks these things don't exist at all in spite of that, right? That's what we mean by a wrong view. We're going to see that in the second part when we look at the non-virtuous action of having a wrong view. You come to a conclusion where you hold the opposite to what is true, that what the Buddha said exists actually doesn't exist. So this is one we have to investigate to see, do we really have this? Are we really free from those kinds of wrong views? And number 4 there, being born where no Buddha has appeared and therefore being bereft of his teachings. So again, this is something we can say is true for everyone in this world right now. A Buddha has appeared in this world system. It's been some time, 2,600 years ago, but nonetheless, the Buddha's teachings are, still here. The Buddha provided those teachings very extensively, and they were, kind of kept in a way so that we still can have access to them. So we are free from the state where we would have no Buddha appearing at this time, which of course, if you appear in a dark eon or a dark, time when there's the light of the Dharma is not shining because a Buddha has not appeared, well, then obviously, you are not going to be able to practice the Dharma because there's nothing to access. You don't have that existing in our world. So those first four, again, have to do with human situations that we would want to avoid. We don't want to be in those four. And we can look at our own situation and assess that we are free from those. The non-human unfree states, as it says there in blue, the first three are the three lower rebirths. Those of a hell being, a hungry ghost, and an animal. We're going to investigate the lower state rebirths in the next part in the person of small capacity. That's one of the important topics after we look at death and impermanence, is the possibility of ending up in such an unfortunate state. Well, all of us have been in those unfortunate states countless times. But this life, we are free of being in them. Hallelujah. We are not in a hell realm. We're not, a preta. We're not an animal. The fourth one is that of a long-lived God. And there's different ways of defining this. We'll look at that in a moment. But these four, I'm just going to orient people in terms of, you may have noticed this chart before. There is that set of charts that come from ILTK, Instituto Lama Tsongkhapa, where I studied. And these charts, number 4 is the one that kind of sets out the world and their inhabitants, or worlds and their inhabitants, all the various realms of existence. This is a topic that we go into in great detail in the master's program in Abhidharma Kosha. We'll see that the lower part of this chart are what are called the 3 lower realms, these unfortunate states of animals, hungry ghosts, and hells. We'll get to this when we get to that topic, but it's said that the large number of sentient beings who exist right now and at any moment in time are in those realms. This is the preponderance of beings are there because of various factors, because of the tendency to engage in non-virtue. And the fact that when you end up in those states, there's very little opportunity to practice virtue. And so mostly you keep creating the causes for future rebirths in those unfortunate states. So we're free of that right now. We're in the human being realm, which is said to have 4 different places of existence. We're in the southern continent, Jambudvipa. And essentially, there are different characteristics of each of those different human existences. One of them, the northern continent, Uttarakuru, is said not to be one of the favorable states for humans to be born because it's got a lifespan of 1,000 years and the minds are not so stable so that you can't really generate strong virtue and non-virtue. It becomes kind of a strange place to be. You can't really move that much spiritually. Now, when we talk about these long-lived gods, some texts say actually that it refers to any of the gods in the desire realm, which is those kind of about the middle of the screen. We also did talk about these concentrations, these opportunities for beings to develop deeper states of awareness that cause you to be reborn in such realms that are a product of those deep states of concentration. They're often referred to as gods, and also the beings at the very top of the screen there, the formless realm beings who have, that's the karma from having generated even subtler states of meditative stabilization. Those beings also are often referred to as gods. We can say essentially that in general, any of these that are on the screen here are not really ideal. But the one that's often singled out as one of the main places that is not a good place to be reborn, I'm sorry, I'd have to leave out these Arya Pure Lands. They're right there where I'm kind of, I don't know if you can see my cursor there circling, but the Arya Pure Lands are places where beings who have insight into emptiness can be reborn. They are a special subset of the form realm. So that's not the ordinary beings being reborn in the form realm. These are superior beings who have insight into emptiness. So those would be an exception to this. But essentially, all of these beings are not really in an ideal state. But the one that, again, they often point to, and that we're going to go back to our text and see a reference to, is right where it says in boldface, ordinary beings' abodes, just right under there. Number 3, great result. The beings that abide there are called without discrimination. They develop this very deep, subtle state of mind that has very little discrimination while one is abiding in it. And so you end up with this strange existence. You kind of enter into it with some awareness of you're entering into that life, and then you don't have any real discrimination until you exit and you go, oh, now I'm leaving it. It's kind of a useless life because you can't do anything in terms of discriminating teachings, discriminating the Dharma, what have you. But nonetheless, as I said, most of these realms are not really ideal for practicing the Dharma because you do become somewhat intoxicated by the higher, more calm states of mind that abide there. And in the desire realm gods, of course, there are many great pleasures as well that you're indulging in. The Buddha, nonetheless, did, go to the heaven of the 33, number 2 down there, in the desire realm gods, because that's where his mother was reborn. But essentially, in any of those realms, you don't really have the leisure and opportunity that we possess here in this human life. I mean, there may be rare instances where you can do that and take advantage of those lives, but it's best to avoid going there by making prayers to be reborn in a human life. We're going to see that coming up under this topic. So again, to explain the different views of what these long-lived gods are, it says there, as for the long-lived gods, commentary on Letter to a Friend discusses 2 types. Those without perception or discrimination, that's the term that is being used here for discrimination, and those in the formless realm. The former abide in one region of the 4th jhana, great result, as if in a hermitage far away from a village. The latter are ordinary beings born in the formless realms. The formless realms, again, you don't have a physical form, a grosser form, and you are abiding in this state of really very subtle mind. Again, they're not really useful minds in terms of spiritual paths. And because you can't receive teachings, because you don't have a physical form, there's no ears to receive teachings, then you essentially don't have an opportunity to embrace the Dharma. And again, I already explained that these beings in the Great Result, who are called without discrimination, who, again, just abide in that state, entering into it, and then exiting it with just very little discrimination and no discrimination in between. Okay, now it says here, Discourse on the 8 Unfree States explains that long-lived gods are the gods of the desire realm who are constantly distracted by activities of desire. So it's kind of interesting. I mean, I always heard this teaching in my early days in studying Buddhism, that this human life, as we're going to see, it really has this ideal situation where we can understand our situation in terms of suffering and happiness in a much more vivid way than we would in these other realms. If you go down to the lower realms, your suffering is so immense that you can't even see any possibility of there being something else that you would strive for. And the mind is usually not so serviceable in that regard. If you go to the upper realms, the mind becomes almost intoxicated with pleasure to where you can't see the undesirable aspects and therefore forms a mind of renunciation. So this human life has kind of a nice balance, if you will. Certainly there are some humans who are born with unbelievable suffering throughout their entire life, right, with chronic conditions and what have you. But they're probably the exception compared to most of us who have some measure of what we can identify as suffering, as unsatisfactory parts of our existence, that we also can temper with an understanding of what it means to have some level of pleasure or happiness. We can see that there's, both of those aspects and both possibilities, and kind of steer ourselves in a spiritual direction on the basis of that understanding. So again, this is something that is kind of mirrored by those different states of existence in that last part where we're free from the 3 that are really, too much suffering to be able to use that life that well. And then also the 4th one, which is too much pleasure and too much, kind of being in this state of such subtle awareness that we can't really kind of want to escape from all of that. We need something that's sort of in between. This human life, again, does afford us incredible opportunity to be able to move in that direction. Let me go to my slides because I think I've been missing sharing some of that. These are just a little bit of advice on those levels of meditation. Maybe I'll let you read that on your own from my teacher, but he's just kind of saying, we need to put some time and effort into this. In regard to these long-lived gods, these are, again, according to Geshe Jampa Gyatso, my teacher in Italy, he says these are the gods called without discrimination, who are born in a part of the 4th concentration called Great Result. Such gods only discriminate that they have been born in this state, thinking, now I have been born. And then they remain for eons without any discrimination until the time of death, when they discriminate, oh, now I will die. In between their birth and death, their faculties do not function, and they do not have any manifest minds, due to which it is impossible for them to practice Dharma. They are also said to be mindless, meaning that they do not have any manifest minds. That is, although they have a mind, we're not saying they don't have a mind at all, that they're mindless in that way. They do not have any manifest minds because their mind is in this very subtle state of being without discrimination. It's a product of, again, another meditative practice that is done that causes one to engage in that uninterrupted state that continues from when you are born there all the way until you die, when the karma is exhausted from engaging in that. It's kind of a strange little outcome that people have from that. So again, this is something just to keep in mind, but we've already looked at the first set of these, which have to do with states that we are free from being in at this time. Endowments is looking at things from the other perspective of what are we endowed with? What are the things that we actually possess? Not what are we free from? What is it that we actually have? And some of these are still a bit in the nature of, we're free, or we are endowed with not being this or not being that. But nonetheless, I think this one is also very useful for us to kind of have another way of examining our lives currently. This also has 2 points, and this is because we take the 10 and we divide it into 2 sets of 5, just like we divided the 8 into 2 sets of 4. We have the 5 endowments that pertain to ourselves, and then the 5 that pertain to others. So, and once more, in Sravaka levels, which was the text by Asanga, these are said to be being human. So just being born human, that in of itself is something we are endowed with. Being born somewhere central, with unimpaired faculties, with our faculties complete, being free from no inexpiable heinous actions. It's not the term I usually refer to these as, but we'll talk about those when we get to them shortly. And then lastly, having faith in the source. And we'll talk about what that's referring to. Here, born somewhere central, of course, being human isn't explained because that's, we all know what that means, being born with a human body. We all had that good fortune of being born with a human existence. So that's the first one. That's what we are endowed with right from the get-go. The second one, born somewhere central, is to be born in a place where once more the 4 types of followers are active. So we have, again, the 2 ordained and the 2 lay practitioners, male and female of each. Unimpaired faculties, of course, consists of not being stupid or dumb or having fully functioning body parts, eyes, ears, and so forth. So again, this is kind of an opposite of what we saw in terms of that freedom. We're free of having impaired faculties or being stupid or dumb, what have you. We here have unimpaired faculties. We're looking at that from what we are endowed with. So those 2 are really speaking to the same thing, just from 2 different perspectives. No inexpiable heinous actions implies not having committed or caused others to commit what is called here an uninterrupted action. I'm going to go to my slides to share this with you, but essentially, most of you have heard of this. There are said to be 5 actions. We used to refer to them as actions of immediate retribution. They call them here inexpiable, uninterrupted heinous actions. The idea is these are like the 5 worst actions that we can engage in terms of everyday sort of actions. Certainly, breaking vows becomes a much more powerful action for as you move and progress on the path. But these 5 are said to be particularly powerful because they cause one to not have an interruption in existences between the life in which you commit those acts and your next rebirth, which will be in the worst hell, the hell of Avicii, the hell of unrelenting torment. So essentially, what happens is because these 5 are so serious, is that unless you purify them, which the Mahayana does teach a way to do that, we'll see that when we get to our teachings on karma, but we did touch on it previously when we talked about the limb of confession. But the idea is that unless you purify those at the end of this life, you will not have another existence between this life and your rebirth in that hell state. Nothing else can come to ripen at the end of that life that will be kind of averting that. You will end up having to face immediate retribution. That's why we often use that term. But the idea of uninterrupted works just as well. There's no interruption in terms of something else you go to and then have to experience the consequences of that act. So what are those 5 acts? It's really good to know, right? So that we avoid them. Hopefully none of us have engaged in this. This is from Geshe Sopa's commentary. The next opportune circumstance is not having committed the most powerful negative actions, those that produce extremely harmful results. There are 5 actions called heinous crimes or automatic transgressions is used here. Again, those are not terms that I tend to use as much. I don't know, when I was studying it, they were always called the 5 actions of immediate retribution, but you'll hear different names for these. The first one and the third, first through the third, are all about killing a being. First, intentionally killing your father, meaning the genetic father of this life, your biological father. And your biological mother, killing your mother, would be the second one. The third one is an arhat. An arhat is a foe destroyer, a being who has abandoned all of the afflictive obscurations. In other words, they have attained nirvana. They could be someone on the Hinayana path who has done that, or there could certainly be someone on the Bodhisattva path who has abandoned all the afflictive obscurations, which they wouldn't have yet become a Buddha, but they would be in the same category as an Arhat. Of course, we don't know who an Arhat is, so the lesson from this is don't kill anybody. Certainly don't kill your mother or father, and try to stay uninvolved with any decisions being made about the lives of your father and mother, if they are still with you and you're needing to be involved in any of that decision making. Hopefully they've made their own decisions about what they want done in terms of their care, but I've always heard that it's really important to distance ourselves to some degree from any of those decisions that we might make about the lives of our father or mother. The fourth one and the fifth one, in some texts, they say you actually can't technically do these anymore because the Buddha himself, who lived 2,500, 2,600 years ago, Shakyamuni Buddha, is no longer present. So the Buddha's body isn't there, and nor is the original Sangha that was around the Buddha, so that you can't, first of all, draw blood from the Buddha's body with malicious intent, which would be the fourth, and then create a schism in the Sangha or between the Buddha and the Buddha's disciples. That's the fifth. But nonetheless, I mean, I think they pointed these out because Devadatta, who was the Buddha's cousin, actually did both of these. He did cause some injury to the Buddha's body, which caused the body to bleed. And then, of course, created a schism in the Sangha through creating division among the members of the Sangha, the ordained members. And Sangha here is referring to the ordained community. But as I said, in some texts, it seems like we can't engage in that actual action of immediate retribution, but we can engage in something very close to that. That's why certainly in our spiritual communities, and many of you are involved with Dharma centers and what have you, it's really good to avoid any type of disharmony, anything that kind of holds people back from creating a more cohesive, harmonious environment for people to engage in the Dharma and gain realizations. That's the problem with the schism in the Sangha, is that it becomes an obstacle to people moving forward with their spiritual realizations. And so that's why it's being singled out. And of course, a malicious drawing of blood from a Buddha is obviously something, that would be harmful just by the mind that wants to do that. It's a very powerful mind. So if we engage in any of those 5, and again, the last 2, it would be something that is similar to that, we can create the causes to be reborn in this worst hell state in our very next lifetime. So let's go back. I think I've got one more slide to share on this. According to, maybe 2 or 3 possibly, yeah, because I remember Geshe Sopa does explain a bit of this. According to the Hinayana Abhidharma, completing any of these extremely negative actions will prevent you from attaining arhatship or emancipation during that life, no matter how much effort you exert. So it becomes an obstacle in that very life to going forward in terms of your attaining a goal of arhatship, becoming a foe destroyer, or attaining liberation then consequently. The immediate and automatic result of these actions will be birth in a lower realm where beings have very long lives. So any opportunity to practice the path will be pushed far into the future. I'm not sure why Geshe Sopa doesn't say this hell of Avicii. That's what we're taught when we in the master's program. That is the worst hell that exists. I can show you on that chart. We actually did have all the hell realms. Yeah, I did have all the hell realms. That is the worst place of existence, and that is where you would be reborn for a very, very long time. So it would act as an obstacle to your gaining, again, good rebirths again and having good situations again. So we want to avoid those 5. The Mahayana view, he says, though, is that even these most negative karmas can be purified later in life by means of special practices. Still, committing any of these 5 actions can delay your attainment of any higher goal for a long, long time. They can still have some peripheral effect, so we have to be careful. They even say that about breaking vows often, is that you can have some impairment in your progress on the spiritual path, even though they might not, cause some more immediate harm. Through your purification, you can, remove some of that. So we have to be, again, careful about these actions, and hopefully every one of us has that freedom, that endowment, I guess is a proper word in this context. We're endowed with not having committed any of those 5. And we can kind of breathe a sigh of relief that we don't have to experience the effects of those. Then going on about, again, 2/3 of the way down that sentence, it says, faith in the source, which is the 5th of this first group of 5, is to have faith in the foundation from which all the mundane and supramundane virtuous dharmas arise, which is the initial foundation of the 3 higher trainings, discipline. We talked about the 3 higher trainings in the context of the qualities we're looking for in a spiritual teacher. Here, discipline should be understood to encompass all 3 baskets of scriptures. So again, I talked about this when we went through that topic of a spiritual teacher and how ideally we should see them endowed with having pacified their minds, completely pacified their minds. And I can't remember the verb for the last one, but the idea is these are the trainings of ethical discipline, what's set out in the Vinaya basket of the Buddhist teachings, the trainings in concentration in the Sutra basket, and then the trainings in wisdom that are in the Abhidharma basket. So essentially, having faith in the source means having confidence in the 3 baskets, the Tripitaka of the Buddha, the corpus of what the Buddha taught. Can all be divided into those 3 things. It's a training in morality, ethical behavior. It's a training in concentration. It's a training in wisdom. And again, that's everything the Buddha taught. So if we have some faith or confidence here too, we have to look at, are we endowed with this? Maybe some of us are relatively new to the Dharma and we don't have what we might call faith or confidence yet. But that will grow over time, and we can be in a better position to be able to engage in the teachings from that basis of faith. We did touch on faith earlier in terms of clarifying faith. There are said to be 3 levels of faith. The faith that we want to ideally have is what's often referred to as faith of conviction, which is where we actually have, through our own experience and investigation, that level of confidence in the teachings that allows us to have a very solid basis for moving forward. We'll come across that, and we'll talk a bit more about faith in part 2 when we get to the topic of refuge and how we need, a sort of basis of faith to proceed and develop refuge. As those 5, very bottom of the screen, sorry, as those 5 are brought together in one's own mind stream and constitute circumstances for the accomplishment of the Dharma, they are called endowments pertaining to oneself. So that's just the first 5 of these that pertain to oneself because we've created them in our own mind stream, and that we then now are experiencing the fruits of that, those actions, those good behaviors. The second set of 5, the 5 endowments pertaining to others, are said once more in Shrabaka levels by a Sangha to be: the Buddha has come and taught the holy Dharma. Those are the first 2. The teachings still remain. That's the 3rd. And are being followed. That's the 4th. And there's loving kindness and compassion for the sake of others. We'll see what that's referring to in a moment. Here, the Buddha has come or arisen means that after having accumulated the collections of merit and wisdom for 3 countless eons, he manifestly attained complete Buddhahood. So again, this is a special appearance of Buddhas in our world systems that essentially that's called a supreme emanation body. This sort of emanation of a Buddha's mind that, according to Mahayana, appeared in this world as the young Prince Siddhartha, born in this very miraculous way, and then becoming in the royal household, having married and so on, and then getting disillusioned with life and going on his journey of spiritual awakening and sitting under the Bodhi tree, all these various things that are the deeds of the Buddha. Essentially, we are living in the time when a Buddha like that, a supreme emanation body, has appeared in our world system. I might mention that we're in what's called the eon of 1,000 Buddhas, this fortunate eon, where 1,000 Buddhas are going to appear that are like that are able to start the wheel of Dharma turning in a system. By the way, there was a question about turning the wheel of Dharma that I never got around to answering. There was a slide, maybe I'll try to find it and share it at the very end of this, that talks about why we use that phrase, turning the wheel of Dharma. I think someone shared something that went into the 3 turnings of the wheel of Dharma, and that's fine. I mean, I think the question, as I recall, was why do we use that phrase? What is that referring to? What does it mean to turn the wheel of Dharma? But essentially, yeah, there is a meaning for that, and I don't recall it off the top of my head, so I'll retrieve the teaching for that in a moment, just before we do our discussion groups. But the idea is that we're in sort of the wake of the Buddha's teachings. The Buddha appeared 2,500 years ago, taught for and 45 years of his life, left behind this legacy of teachings that we are still benefiting from. So the second point is not just that the Buddha appeared, because it is said sometimes Buddhas appear, but they don't turn the wheel of Dharma. Well, we need to have that turning of the wheel of Dharma. We need to have these teachings that are left behind by a Buddha that allow us to practice the same Dharma that the Buddha practiced. That's taught the holy Dharma, again, about 2/3 of the way down, means that the Buddha or his disciples have taught the Dharma. And of course, it starts with the Buddha, the disciples of the Buddha that carried on the teachings generation after generation, the lineage of teachings that we still are benefiting from, an unbroken lineage going back to the Buddha, is really quite miraculous, really quite wonderful that we have that. So we are at a time when the Buddha came, taught the Dharma, and the teachings survive. That means that from the Buddha coming and teaching the Dharma up to the moment of passing into nirvana, the Dharma attained through seeing the ultimate Dharma has not degenerated. And we could say even beyond that too. And it talks about it being kind of no degeneration of the Dharma during the life of the Buddha until the Buddha passed into parinirvana. But, the teachings kind of survived all of that, and the idea of them surviving and being followed are put together in the next one, meaning that through that very realization of the Dharma, through the direct insight into emptiness that the Buddha helped beings to attain, there are those who see that beings have the power to directly perceive the holy Dharma, and who then follow the teachings in accordance with that realization. Realized beings are still happening. You still have people who are engaged in the Dharma at that level to actually keep the realizations going. So we're at a time when there hasn't been degeneration of those realizations. The teachings have survived, and they are still being realized and followed. The last point here, number 5, there is loving kindness and compassion for the sake of others, means that there are donors and benefactors who provide monastic robes and the like. As these 5 are present in the mind streams of others and constitute conditions for accomplishing the Dharma, they are called endowments pertaining to others. So this 5th one is kind of interesting. Certainly, it's very situational. Some people might wonder, well, it doesn't seem like in the West that there's maybe as ideal conditions to support some people in their practice of the Dharma, particularly those who are ordained. This is something I think we in the West need to become more conscious and aware of, and do what we can to support those among us who need that kind of assistance through our love, compassion, our concern, to become benefactors, to actually do what we can to help others who are trying to engage in the Dharma more wholeheartedly. Again, not to say that many of our ordained folks do have to stay active in the world doing things just to survive. It's unfortunate. But those who are dedicating their lives to study and practice, it's very important, that we support them as best as we can. But nonetheless, it is true that in most parts of the world where Buddhism exists, people are being supported in some way. There is loving kindness and compassion for those practitioners. And certainly we all have benefited from the many people who have been benefactors of this organization, of many other facets of Buddha Dharma that are out there that continue to keep the light of Dharma going in this world. So we look at these endowments, we again see 5 that we've created through the force of our own actions and behaviors and so on. And then we have 5 that are very circumstantial, that we are at a time when all of this is happening. Like we aren't bereft of any of these. So we've got all of this happening. And this is really, once more, this first step to really help us to identify the situation that we're in so that we have this just overwhelming sense that we are so fortunate that we have such incredible opportunity right now. And we don't want to, of course, miss out on this and not take advantage of what we currently possess. That's kind of the whole idea behind it. Let me go back to my slides and see, was there anything else? Well, this is what we're going to be moving into. Let me go back to the text just to make sure that there's nothing else I wanted to cover before that. I think we're just going to finish up that section. Yeah, contemplating their great value. I could just stay back with the my little note there, of course, is explaining that in the more traditional texts, it is divided into 3 parts. Again, I'm going to go ahead and present those first, simply because I think it might be useful then when we come back to understand how the more traditional way, at least in Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand, how we can find the 3 parts of this in terms of what's the great value of this human existence that we've already identified as having the 10 freedoms and 8 freedoms and the 10 endowments. So this has 3 headings in Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand. Its great benefits in the short term, how we can extract the meaning of this life in a more temporal way. Secondly, its great benefits in the long term, how we can do it in a more ultimate way. And then in short, thinking on how even every moment of it can be most beneficial. Sometimes we call these 3 temporal value, ultimate value, and momentary value. So we see that there are kind of 3 different aspects of value. Value for what we can gain in the short term of having good existences, what we can gain in the long term, the ultimate goals of liberation and enlightenment, and then how every moment of this life has some sort of momentary value because we can use every moment of this life in a very powerful way. So I'm just going to go through this rather quickly from Liberation, Bangpa Rinpoche's text. Its great benefits from the short-term point of view. No matter which of the upper rebirths you desire, be it human or divine, or which of the lower births you want to avoid, you can succeed. This is the value of this human life. And that's the first level of the stages of the path we're going to go into, is you can use this life at least to gain a good rebirth. To achieve a high rebirth, you must have ethics, and you can guard them in this life. To be affluent in a high rebirth, you must practice generosity, and you can accomplish that in this lifetime. And to have a magnificent retinue, you need to practice patience, with which you can familiarize yourself in a life such as this. So all of these things we need to have a good opportunity like this one in the future can be accomplished with this human existence. I'm skipping over a lot of it if you want to read more on these topics. Secondly, its great benefits from the ultimate point of view. In order to achieve liberation, you must cultivate the Dharma path for achieving it, that of the 3 high trainings, the first of which is ethics. So let us take the pratimoksha vows as an example, because that's the basis of attaining individual liberation, which is the goal of the person of middling capacity. We're going to look at that again in the part 2, along with the person of small or least capacity. You must cultivate renunciation in order to develop or imprint these vows in your mind stream. But it is difficult to develop things like renunciation in other migration states, for example, as gods and so on. As I was explaining, you end up in these higher states of existence. Renunciation doesn't come so easily because you think that life is really pretty idyllic. And so why should you renounce it if it's such a wonderful state to be in? And of course, even in the lower states, you won't have that opportunity because you can't even muster up a virtuous thought, much less, a thought of renunciation. And then, of course, he goes on to talk about the other result that's more ultimate. One develops the most powerful bodhicitta in the human rebirth. The human form is also the best and most powerful rebirth in which to reach omniscience, Buddhahood. That's the other ultimate result, not just individual liberation, but omniscience. Even a beginner in this sort of rebirth can, through the secret tantric path, become enlightened in one lifetime in the one body. So again, this is an amazing ability we have with this human existence to practice it to attain the ultimate result of either our own liberation or omniscience, Buddhahood. Number 3, thinking briefly about how even every moment of it can be most beneficial. And Pawaka does mention, he says, the literature is not clear about this heading, which supplements the other two on the ways in which the optimum human rebirth is so very beneficial. But nonetheless, he goes on to talk about it. And that does seem like from our text, this isn't talked about in Lama Tsongkhapa's middle-length Lamrim, but it, I guess, maybe was part of the Lamrim that developed over time, perhaps. And Pabonka Rinpoche emphasizes it. He says this rebirth has the additional great benefit of holding great benefit every day, every moment. You will create immeasurable causes for your liberation and omniscience if you do not let even the short time it takes to burn a stick of incense go by without making use of it. And, for example, work hard to build up the accumulations of merit or purify yourself of obscurations. So like every moment of this life is pregnant with opportunity, rich with opportunity. We have to be able to use every moment of this life in that manner, where we take advantage of every single opportunity we have. He says in that section as well, it is a mistake not to regret wasting our optimum human rebirths and yet to regret wasting 1 or 2 silver coins. We might become really obsessed with like not wasting, $1 here or there or what have you, but that's ridiculous. I mean, we should be much, much more concerned about wasting any moment of this life. Now, again, these are states we move towards. It's very hard to be right from the beginning that engrossed in using every moment of this life to that degree. But we just keep moving and pushing the envelope, and eventually over time we'll get to where our lives are imbued with great meaning and great purpose. That's that third one. So again, in Lama Tsongkhapa's text, it's not laid out quite as clearly. And so let's go ahead and go through that. We'll see how much time we have for tonight. I know we're not going to make it through this entire topic because as I went through it, I realized there's quite a bit to cover. So we've got time. Like I said, I think we'll amply fill up the remaining classes that we have. Contemplating their great value. If you engage in no practice of pure Dharma at all for the sake of lasting happiness, but strive your entire life merely to eliminate your suffering and attain happiness, meaning the suffering and happiness of this life, then you are like an animal, despite your fortunate rebirth, since animals do the same and really compare ourselves. Most animals are really consumed with just getting what they need for their happiness, what pleasure they can find in this life, and avoiding what is going to bring some pain or suffering. You need a physical basis like the one described above in order to practice the Mahayana path. Letter to a Student, which I think is a text by Chandra Goman. The base of the path of those gone to bliss, the tool for leading beings, is that most powerful mind, bodhicitta, which is gained by human beings. That path is not found by gods or nagas, nor by asuras, not by garudas, knowledge holders, kinaras, or uragas. And I've got a little footnote where I've explained all these based on what's said in the great treatise. But essentially, we know what gods are the gods of the desire realm. Nagas are these kind of dragon-like beings, according to the note that they have in the great treatise. Vidyadharas, which again let me see, in our texts, it was called knowledge holders. There are knowledge holders in the tantric path that are different. But here, these Vidyadharas are said to be kind of these bewitching women figures, female figures. And it says Garudas, which were mentioned, are bird-like creatures that overcome snakes. And then Kinaras, it should say Kinaras, not Kinarans. Kinaras are demigods of the Himalaya. The demigods, again, are the Asuras. Uragas, which is translated as snakes in different books. So I'm assuming that it's referring to snakes. So I don't know. It's just saying that all these other beings that maybe hold some place in more early days of Buddhist mythology, cosmology, what have you, those beings are never going to find the path. The mind of bodhicitta can be developed and gained by human beings in this, existence that we have. That's the way that we're actually going to accomplish it. Some gods of the desire realm, with strong predispositions from having previously trained in the path as a human, are suitable as a support for seeing the truth for the first time, meaning that they can attain a direct realization into emptiness in the life as a desire realm god. But it's contingent upon having trained as a human. But it is impossible to attain the Arya path for the first time on the basis of birth in a realm above that, meaning that in the form realms and the formless realms, you cannot attain your initial direct realization into emptiness on the basis of those births. However, as explained above, the majority of desire realm gods lack the requisite freedom, so they cannot attain the path for the first time. This is where, like I said, they're intoxicated generally with such pleasurable existences that they don't even think about moving the mind in the area of, renunciation, much less bodhicitta, and developing a direct realization of emptiness becomes impossible. Again, inhabitants of the continent of Uttarakuru are unsuitable as a support for vows, which is why those beings of the other three continents are praised. Again, I mentioned them earlier on that chart. The note here explains that the northern continent is one of those among the representation of the world. And again, as I was saying, they have a mind that is not so stable, so that they cannot really be a support for vows to, avoid what is non-virtuous and generate what is virtuous. So again, among the beings of the other three continents, the inhabitants of Jambudvipa, which is the southern continent that we are said to be located on, this world, are especially praised. So again, these are just Buddhist cosmology ways of referring to the existence that we currently have. Having gained such an excellent basis as this, why would I not make it fruitful? If I do not make it meaningful, could there be any greater self-deception or stupidity? Having passed over and over through the many perilous places that lack freedom, such as the lower rebirths, were I to render this unique opportunity for liberation meaningless and go back to those places, I would have lost my mind as though confused by a magic spell. Thinking in this way, meditate again and again. And then there is a passage from Shantideva's text, Entering the Bodhisattva Way, where this is in the very first chapter, the third verse. He says, having found this kind of freedom, this human life that's rich in the freedoms and endowments, if I do not cultivate virtue, then no deception could be greater. Nothing could be more confused than that. This is a wonderful verse to remind us of, every day, this is our job, is to make sure we use this life as best as we can, because it's an incredible opportunity. And later in that same chapter, Master Shantideva says, having found by chance this place so beneficial and hard to find, were I now with understanding, even with the knowledge I have, to be led away to that hell once again, as though confused by magic spells, I will have utterly lost my mind. Even I do not know what so confused me. Why is it dwelling deep within me? If we do examine, we do see that we often have a lot of resistance to moving in a more virtuous direction. Many of us have been around the Dharma for quite a few years, and we still see the tendency of our minds to fall back to more habitual patterns. This is, seems like madness, right? If we really believe in these teachings, really have faith and confidence in what the Buddha has taught, it should be very clear what we need to do, right? Yeah. We need to really focus on making sure that we don't fall sort of astray and buy back into these older patterns that are only going to lead to more misery. Instead, we have to extract the meaning, the essence of this life in the ways that were set out, temporally, ultimately, and using every moment of this life in the most powerful way. So here's where some of that is encapsulated in this blue section. In that way, think how this physical basis is highly meaningful, not only in terms of the final goal, the more ultimate goals, which again was the second benefit that we talked about, or second value, but even temporarily. For with it, one can easily accomplish generosity, morality, patience, and so on, the causes of an excellent body, wealth, and all that accompanies a higher status. Higher status meaning, again, the states of existence in the upper realms. But in particular, again, we want to accomplish a human existence with all the opportunities we have in this life, especially the opportunity that Tantra affords. If with this very meaningful physical basis you do not apply yourself day and night to developing the causes of the two objectives, it would be like returning empty-handed from an island of precious jewels. Now, there's different ways of interpreting two objectives. You could say the temporal and the ultimate objectives, but there was one commentary I read that said the objectives of liberation and enlightenment, which of course are the more ultimate goals. But you could say, I mean, we do often talk about how the Buddha set out two main goals that we can achieve. The more temporal goal of a good rebirth, which is, again, our small scope teachings. And then secondly, the more ultimate goals, which he often condensed them into this word definite goodness. If we get a good rebirth, that's not a definite goodness. High status is not definite because you'll die from that existence and could go on to an unfortunate state. Whereas if we attain liberation or enlightenment, that's definite goodness. That's a result that we can rely upon to always continue because we'll never degenerate from that state. So that's the idea behind another interpretation we could have then on these two objectives. But again, this is an often used analogy, right, of somebody going to an island of jewels and somehow returning empty-handed, like you went there was all this opportunity and you didn't come back with anything. I'm going to mention this. I'm not going to share it with you tonight, but Geshe Lungtap Sopa has excellent practice advice on this topic in his first volume of Steps on the Path to Enlightenment, pages 259 and 260. Maybe I'll just show it on the screen, those of you who don't have the written version of it, so that you can find it at least in your book. I did highlight it here and it should come right up. It starts with the great Dromtonpa, the great Geshe Dromtonpa. Dromtonpa was again the heart disciple of Lama Tisha, who we are following essentially as the author of this text. Again, this is a really nice little section that I would encourage you to read. So anyway, I'll leave it at that. You can read that on your own. If we've got time, maybe later, not this class. Let me go back because I just wanted to finish off this section if there was anything more left. I'm not sure that there is. No, that was it. So we will resume next week with contemplating the difficulty in finding these leisures and endowments or freedoms and endowments. This is the third and final topic in this section. And in the meantime, let's go ahead and take a look at the questions for the discussion tonight. And then I'll see if there are maybe one or two questions before we break into groups. Essentially, you can do, I think, the first two. The last two questions will hold until next week because I haven't really touched on it. Well, actually, you could do that one. It's covered again in another section later on where Tsongkhapa advises subsuming the meditation here into 3 points, which is the 3 points I've already emphasized. But nonetheless, when I put this question together, I was basing it on his comments a little bit later in our text. But the first two are the 8 freedoms and 10 endowments, just to kind of go through them, review them, and kind of understand what they're referring to. Then we'll do questions 3 and 4 next week. All right. So any questions from anything tonight? Mary Jo, you've got your hand up, please. You can unmute.
Thank you. It wouldn't let me unmute. I don't know why. So earlier you said pray to be reborn as a human. Years ago, I heard a teaching with Venerable Amy who said to pray to be reborn in a pure land so that you can quickly become a Buddha. So I'm a little confused. Because I've been praying for everybody, all beings, to be reborn in a pure land with no births in between. And now it's like, oh, dang. Have I been wrong? Did I misunderstand?
No, there are teachings that say this, to be reborn in a pure land. There are different types of pure lands. I mean, even the Amitabha Pure Land, which is said to be one of the easiest to be reborn in, even that, you don't have to have some special status or, a tantric connection to that being or any of that, unlike some of the tantric Pure Lands and what have you. what's interesting is that there is a passage, and maybe I'll find that and share that with you, a passage from Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand by Pabanka Rinpoche, where he says that there are bodhisattvas in the Pure Lands that make prayers to be reborn as a human. And
Oh, wow.
the reason being that this human existence, when you take into consideration the tantric perspective, which again, we're not going to see so much as part of this course because this is a sutra presentation, but the tantric perspective is that you can become enlightened incredibly quickly on the basis of this human life. Even if you were to go to a Pure Land, it would take substantially longer to attain enlightenment in the Pure Land than it would in this human life if you use this life as wisely as you can and attain enlightenment through the tantric path. It said that you can attain enlightenment in as short as 3 years and 3 months of this human existence, some incredibly short time. Whereas taking rebirth in those Pure Lands, you will attain enlightenment in many of those Pure Lands, and Amitabha's Pure Land is said to be one of them. But the duration of time that you take will be much greater. And not just for your own sake. You can remember that those of you who've studied Tantra, the tantric motivation goes beyond our ordinary compassion that wants to, or ordinary great compassion, that's kind of a weird phrase to put together, but our great compassion that we normally cultivate in the Mahayana is to become enlightened so that we can protect all beings from suffering and have that motivation that we absolutely are going to be dedicated to helping all beings be free from suffering and to find the happiness they seek. But the motivation in the tantric path is called unbearable compassion, where we say, and I want to become enlightened even more quickly because I find it unbearable that beings continue to suffer because I'm not enlightened. So if you go off to the Pure Lands, you're going to get enlightened eventually, but the whole time you're off in the Pure Lands on your way to becoming a Buddha, sentient beings continue to suffer. So if you have any kind of connection to the tantric path or to this unbearable compassion, this wish to become a Buddha as quickly as possible to help others to not suffer, then the Pure Land isn't the optimal path. Nonetheless, I mean, I get why people make prayers to be reborn in those realms and, to have things kind of in a more idyllic state where there's not the gross suffering in those realms, it's said. It's a much more kind of a easier way in some ways to become enlightened. But if you can practice well in this life and use this life or a future human life, you're still going to save time and become enlightened much more quickly than if you go into a Pure Land. That's my understanding. And I mean,
Oh, see, I was under the misunderstanding then that if we could get reborn in a Pure Land, that we would quickly become a Buddha to benefit others then. So yeah, I guess, yeah. So,
I mean,
okay.
it is interesting. I mean, I heard certainly Lama Zopa Rinpoche talk about Pure Lands every now and then, but he seemed to always come back to emphasizing getting a human rebirth.
Oh,
I'll find that passage in Liberation and share it next week.
yeah.
In the meantime, yeah, I didn't get a chance to share that slide about the turning the wheel. Shoot. I'm always forgetting these things before I come in here. And then when I get here, I remember the things that I was supposed to remember. But anyway, that's how it goes sometimes. Let me go ahead and pull that up. I think I can, if I go to my, so that I will look more into this though for you, Mary Jo. I don't want there to be any confusion. I'm certainly not trying to contradict other teachers. I'm just trying to share what I had heard again from, Pabanka Rinpoche's text and other teachings I've had here and there. So I don't know. Let me hold on there just one second. Let me see if I can, exploring the truths. Here it is. Let me see if it's going to come up with the slide that I wanted. Okay, let me put that on screen. Wow, I found that pretty quickly. All right, we can do that, and then we will do our little breakout into groups, and those who you need to leave can certainly take off at that point. If you look here, what it says on the slide, let me make it a little bit larger. The meaning of turning the wheel of Dharma. The wheel is an ancient Indian symbol of creation, sovereignty, protection, and the sun. The wheel represents motion, continuity, and change, forever moving onwards like the circular wheel of the heavens. As an ancient Indian weapon, A wheel of sharp blades was rolled into the ranks of the enemy, swung on a rope as a vicious rotating weapon, or hurled even as a discus. Buddhism adopted the wheel as a symbol of the Buddhist teachings and as an emblem of the Chakravartin, or wheel turner, wheel turning king, usually is what that's referred to, identifying the wheel as the Dharma chakra, or wheel of the law. The Tibetan term for Dharma chakra, Choki Korlo, literally means the wheel of transformation or spiritual change. The wheel's swift motion symbolizes the rapid spiritual transformation revealed in the Buddha's teachings. And as a weapon of change, it represents the overcoming of all obstacles and illusions. So that's the idea behind using the wheel. And then turning the Dharma wheel refers to the Buddha giving teachings that lead sentient beings to temporary happiness within cyclic existence and to the highest goodness of liberation and full awakening. Again, the highest or definite goodness that I mentioned earlier, as well as the temporal states of high rebirth. Anyway, that was in a teaching I did around turning the wheel of Dharma. But okay, so I'm going to do discussion with Stephen here in the Gompa because Stephen's the only one in the Gompa. So I won't be joining you online, any of you, but please take the time that you have, maybe take a little break, come back in, discuss the 8 freedoms and the 10 endowments, and then we'll come back 5 minutes before. Thank you, Shayla, for setting that all up. And we will resume the class then. Those of you who have to leave, be sure to dedicate all the merit. Again, we have 2 more classes the next 2 Wednesdays, and we will finish this section, and I'll give you some more guidance about what comes after that. Okay, thank you, and see most of you soon. So, looks like folks have come back from discussion, and just wanted to check in and see, were there any things that came up in discussion that you need to ask about, or anything? Anything else from tonight? Yeah, Elijah, please unmute. Let me ask you to unmute and see if that helps.
Okay.
There you go.
Yeah. Well, this didn't come up explicitly in the conversation, but we were kind of talking about like when Buddha Dharma would die out temporarily until, the next Buddha came. But I was just
Mhm.
wondering, because you were talking about like the fortunate and dark aeons, why I was wondering, why do those happen where like no Buddhas appear, for example?
Well, again, the easy answer to that is karma, because the karma sort of isn't there for a Buddha's teachings to exist in a world system. And when you think about it, if these supreme emanation bodies appear in a world system, it means that the karma of that system has been ripened to a level where they're ready to receive some of that. They've created the causes and conditions for that karmically, which is kind of interesting. When they talk about when the Buddha first taught, like at the very first teaching he gave, when the sutra that's called the first turning of the wheel of Dharma, the Four Noble Truths Sutra, is when many of there were like 5 of these practitioners that he had practiced with, but they said they attained these almost instant realizations because their minds were really ripe because of all the practice that they did. And I guess India at that time was a very rich place for philosophy and practice and what have you. So it's kind of like you need to have that upswell of all these causes and conditions that create the fertile ground for a Buddha to come in and provide all the teachings. And then the teachings are said to last, we touched on this in one of the earlier classes, like 5,000 years. And over the course of every 500 years for 10 periods till you get to the 5,000th year after the Buddha, there's a little bit more degeneration, a little bit more degeneration. And so the teachings do tend to wane, and the power of the teachings wane because practitioners find it more challenging, in the world that they're living in and what have you. So anyway, that's the idea that I've heard about that it really is a karmic occurrence, and why we have these dark periods where Buddhas are not appearing. So Nim and Aphasia, I think you had your hand up, but I didn't get around to, there you are. Good. Did you want to unmute and ask something? Do I need to ask you to? There you go.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to ask you that question. I've heard somewhere in a teaching that there could only be about another 1,400 years before Buddhism no longer here or even degenerate. I'm not sure.
Mhm.
Have you heard?
Did you say 400 years?
1,400.
Oh, 1,400. Yeah. I don't know. I haven't heard a more specific number. Again, other than this 5,000 year idea. If we look at
Yeah.
if the Buddha appeared roughly 2,600 years ago, we'd be halfway through that, which would
Yeah.
mean another roughly 2,400, 2,500 years,
Yeah.
remaining. But again, I think these are, again, set out in cosmology on the basis of some understanding of the cyclical nature of things, but in any particular world system, I would still think people would have some ability to have an effect on that through the power of their own keeping the Dharma going and alive and being realized, and all the things that we have been touching on here and there that make this time a very valuable time that we're still living in, even though we're quite distant from when the Buddha appeared. So I don't want to, and my own feeling is these are kind of set out as a general rule of what happens, but I don't know that it's that hard and fast. I
Okay.
don't want to believe that it's that hard and fast, but who knows if this world will even be here in 2,400 years,
Exactly.
the way things are going. I mean, we could all be, whatever.
Yeah.
So,
Just a clarifying question I've been thinking as we
uh-huh.
discuss degeneration. Is there, and I'm not an advocate for what's happening at all, but is there some benefit or merit to having degeneration occur? Because it brings people to the Dharma, doesn't it?
Yeah. I mean, certainly. And they do say that. I mean, that's one reason why this term of degenerate times is not just referring to like the 20th, 21st century. It's referring to this whole era that we're living in, these kind of eons that we're in, where there is such a degeneration of the minds of beings in terms of afflictions, even the physical bodies we have, where we used to have human bodies that would live 1,000+ years or something, and now we live up to maybe 80 to 100, depending upon, individual lives. But essentially, this is indicative of the time that we're living in, and is said to be a very rich time for practice. And it's also, of course, the time when we can use things like lojong, mind training, in very powerful ways, because we're surrounded by lots of affliction and lots of suffering and lots of difficult things. So there's some richness that comes with all of that. So yes, it can be a very powerful time for practice. But at the same time, I suppose there's always that danger of things degenerating too much, and then even practitioners no longer being able to continue to sustain their practice because things have become, unwieldy and too challenging for them. I don't know. I don't want to, my imagination can get kind of can run away with various ideas of where things could go from here. But we do see certainly that when things get really, really bad in the world, you have two possibilities, right? People come together and they actually, support each other, and it becomes a very rich opportunity for people to fight together in the face of extreme challenges. Or people become like dog eat dog, and they just become totally incapable of thinking about anyone else other than themselves. And with the Buddhist view of kind of what's driving all of our problems, the tendency for self-grasping and self-cherishing and all this, I can see why a degeneration into that sort of a world could happen very easily, where suddenly everyone is on their own. And so I don't know. I mean, if it goes too far, you could potentially have those kinds of situations in my mind, but I think that's one of the things we can hold. That's why one of the ideas that we had, I need to wrap it up here. I'm sorry, but keeping people a little later. But one of the ideas we had of those discriminations, that 6 discriminations, the final one was about discriminating the Dharma to remain a long time and what have you. That's a really important one to have, whenever we sit down to practice or to listen to teachings, to try to hold that view. Every one of us is part of keeping these teachings in our world and keeping them active in ways that we can have them be sustained through whatever goes on in our physical world. So these interesting ideas. Thank you both.
One more question.
Oh, one more. Okay.
He'll ask next week.
I was going to ask, is it true that tantric teachings will not be taught again by any other Buddha?
There are said to be, of the 1,000 Buddhas that appear, in this fortunate eon, only 4 that will teach Tantra.
Right.
And Shakyamuni Buddha was 1. And so there are 3 others, I think, that teach Tantra. I don't remember the details on this.
Right.
So
So
but
there's
yeah,
3 more.
Maitreya, I don't think will. No.
No,
And
he
he's the
won't.
next Buddha, the 5th Buddha. Lama Tsongkhapa is supposedly, I think I remember hearing he was going to be the 15th Buddha, but I'm not even
Okay.
sure if he will be. I don't know.
Right.
It's kind of weird. They've already got the prediction of the 1,000 Buddhas
Yeah,
before
they
he even
do.
became a Buddha. I always find it kind of strange, but I all this sort of stuff when I get on into that topic of like, so many Buddhas and what have you. And all. It's not to say that tantric teachings will completely disappear. They just won't be taught by
Yeah.
that Buddha, that supreme emanation body. And so they can still be practiced and what have you, but where they go to and how you would access them would become obviously pretty challenging. You might have to go to these pure realms where you can receive tantric teachings in a tantric pure land or something. I'm not sure, but anyway.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right. We need to wrap up. If you have further questions, please hold on to them and I will answer them at another time. Sorry, losing my train of thought here. Let's pull up this. Okay, whoops, wrong thing. Sorry, trying to get the right thing shared here. I have to find on my screen here. There's the homework questions. Oh, there's the chart. That's what it was. And let me go to the prayers. Okay. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may we quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish but increase more and more. Then we'll do the prayer for His Holiness, and as we recite this, think we're creating the causes for the good health, long lives, and fulfillment of all the holy wishes of all of our precious Gurus. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. Then we'll hold some thoughts dedicating for Rinpoche's reincarnation to be identified quickly and for everything to be auspicious for that being to be of incredible benefit to all the beings in this world and beyond. And lastly, we dedicate for all the beings that we're holding in our hearts, those we know, as well as those in parts of the world where the situation is dire for individuals, beings. We can send this positive energy out to whoever it is we're holding in our hearts. Think that it becomes the cause for removing their suffering immediately, helping them to have all the causes that will lead to true happiness. And may this be so for all beings through what we've done together here tonight or today, whatever it is in your time zone. Okay. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining, and I will see you all again in a week. So, all right, be well.